don't really understand how bad accessibility is right now. Kind of live in a bubble.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they say we live in a free country, but not everyone's free to go or do whatever they feel like, because there's a lot of places that are simply not accessible to a lot of the population.
Yeah, the regulations only really kick in certain circumstances. For instance, elevators are only required for 4 floors or more, and if you're in a wheelchair, like, you need an elevator even if there's 2 floors. Like, you can't be just rolling upstairs without help. And so we really are, our regulations are basically built so that unless, like, there's a ton of floors or, like, extreme circumstances, disabled people need an able-bodied person with them to help. We have a system built on disabled body relying on able-bodied people.
Yeah, I mean, I come from New York, and in the New York subway system, there's like maybe there's very, very few stations that are accessible. So if someone doesn't have a car and they're trying to get somewhere via public transportation and they don't live next to the few stops on the line that are accessible, they're screwed.
Also not accessible much are polling places, which is really awful because polling places, like, voting is a huge part of our country, and knowing that so few polling places are accessible, it's at 20%. 20% of polling places are accessible.
And I mean, that's one of the big kind of deals with our country, is that everyone's supposed to have a say in our government. And they're not making it very easy for that to happen.
Yeah, especially since people who don't vote are often use that, have people use that against them, being like, oh well, you can't complain if you didn't vote.
So there are a lot of disabilities that you can't see. Like if someone has a mental disability, or if they're deaf or blind, or a lot of other things that can hold them back from doing things the way able-bodied people can.
Yeah, and when a person has an invisible disability, you can't really see it. They have an extra layer added on to that disability in the fact that people don't see it and they act accordingly. Like, when that person runs into difficulties, people don't understand. They're not going to offer help because they can't obviously see that this person has a disability. And so they're less likely to be offered help. They're more likely to be met with hostility of like, oh, you can't do this? Why can't you do this?
Yeah.
Like, it's not like you're disabled, and then the person's like, no, actually I am.
Or when someone with an invisible disability gets government help, they'll sometimes be stigmatized, like, oh, you're taking advantage of the government, you're not really disabled, stuff like that.
Yeah, basically the assumption is that if you can't clearly see that the person is disabled, they're not actually disabled, which is a very harmful assumption to make. So, our country is not very famous for doing well with the whole mental illness thing.
Yeah. I mean, our health system is not that great to begin with, and it's really hard to get help for anything, but with mental illness, lots of times it's especially difficult.
Yeah, people don't really view mental illness in the way that they should. They don't really view it as an illness. Like, they don't view it as an illness that needs to be treated. They view it more as a willpower thing. That,
Yeah.
like, oh, well, you could totally overcome this if you just tried hard enough. And that's not true. A mental illness happens because there's something wrong.
Yeah.
There's something wrong that many times people can't overcome on their own. They need pills, they need therapy, they need something, some sort of support that helps their brain get back on its feet.
Yeah, so, and lots of times people will be stigmatized a lot for trying to get help or for trying to get medication. They'll be told that they're just being weak, or that
they're giving in.
Yeah, they're giving in to their
mental
problems,
illness.
and it's an illness.
Especially
It's not...
with depression. People view depression as like just sort of, oh well, you're sad. You can get over it.
Yes. It is a lot more than just sadness.
It's so much more than that. And people who get help for depression, people who are on antidepressants, are so stigmatized, and they're like seen as weak, they're seen as giving in and just not really fighting, and it's like depression does so much more than just make you sad. It has to do a lot with your energy levels as well, and like if you're depressed, in many cases you just don't have the energy to fight your depression without the help of antidepressants. Yeah, so mental illnesses are very stigmatized. They're not treated well. They're seen in a way that really stigmatizes people who can't beat their mental illness on their own miraculously. And we really need to stop doing that.
People can be really nasty and obnoxious.
Yeah, and using ableist language is something that a ton of people do without even thinking about it. It's very casually used in our society.
Yeah, it's kind of like become part of our vernacular.
To the point where a lot of people don't understand that the language they're using is ableist in any way. They only see it as a word. They don't see the harmful connotations.
Yeah.
So some language that's really ableist that you may not know is ableist, dumb, stupid, any of those sorts of things. Those are very ableist language. Also, lame is used a lot as a slur, as is a certain word that is used a lot against people with low IQs.
Yeah.
And people who have injured legs being casually called a cripple, which is also in many cases considered a slur.
So pretty much don't insult people by calling them something that refers to someone with a disability, because that's not okay.
Yeah,
And
by doing that you're basically saying that there is something wrong with being disabled, that like it makes them a bad person in some way, and you're not harming the person that you're actually insulting as much as you're harming disabled people everywhere.
there are a lot of other insults you can use that, trust me, are just probably more effective. So, yeah.
Yeah, like instead of saying dumb or stupid, you can say silly, illogical. Like there are so many other ways that you can replace that language that is a lot less harmful. It's just that you have to consciously be thinking about it, because if you're not, like that language is so into our vernacular that like it slips by unless you're consciously thinking
and it's hard
of
to
not
catch
using
sometimes.
it. So, the movements that are going on right now are mostly awareness movements, and unfortunately a lot of them come from people who are not actually disabled. Most of the movements that are going on, most of the organizations that are really dedicated to raising awareness and like fighting the disability are mostly, if not all, run by people who do not have the disability, and in many cases are speaking over the people who do and assuming what they want without talking to them.
Yeah, this is bad because lots of times they don't know what they want, and that can cause conflict and uneasiness.
Yeah, there's also a lot of what's called inspiration porn, which is basically like those inspiring stories of a person overcoming their disability, and like these stories are great and inspiring and like they can be used in that way, but most of the time they're used in a way of saying that everybody can overcome their disability.
Or that everybody wants to.
And in that way it's used more as a weapon against disabled people than as a genuine empowering tool. So that's not good.
No.
Because like in general, the general like movements going on are all about able-bodied people saving disabled people, which is very problematic.
Oh yeah, and if you ever see on Facebook a picture of like a disabled person from some random page you never heard of that's just trying to get 1 million likes, they're doing that just to publicize their page. They're being nasty, they're being rude, they're being money-hungry douchebags, and they're using people, so cut it out.
Yeah, especially with the inspiration porn, like, the inspiration porn phenomenon is, like, all about using disabled people to make able-bodied people feel better. If you don't see the problem with that, I can't help you.
So we're sure that there are a lot of movements out there that are doing great stuff, but yeah.
But unfortunately, most of the well-publicized ones are from people who are outside speaking over people with disabilities. So, there are probably a lot of awesome organizations out there, and we need to find them and support them. And time for the positive corner. So,
Yay, positive corner.
in the positive corner today, I want to highlight an organization called Alternative Limb Project, and they are making artificial limbs that are artistic and stylistic and fashionable, so that, like, they're really a part of the person that is interesting and, like, are used as a tool to spark conversation and, like, regain the person's self-confidence after losing their limb. Like, they're used as an empowering tool rather than purely for functional use. And so a lot of people that have lost their limbs, that have gotten an artificial limb from the Alternative Limb Project, have spoken about, like, regaining their self-confidence after their injury and, like, re-owning their body image and regaining their own sense of self.
That's really cool. And also in the positive corner, some theaters, like movie theaters that were located around where I lived in New York, started having nights where they'd show a movie with, like, less annoying sound and where you could bring in your own food and where the lights aren't as dark. And that's to accommodate people who have sensory issues or who can't deal with the regular movie theater environment. And that's been seen as a really good thing, especially for some of the autistic community and just for people who generally don't feel that environment works for them.
Awesome. So we will see you next week. We're sorry for the absence last week. We were really busy. So we'll be taking the last 2 videos planned and combining them into one video. So join us next week to talk about Isms, and we'll see you then.
Back on schedule now, so see ya.